This is the first of two videos covering LDAP and Active Directory. This video will serve as a primer on LDAP. We will talk about the LDAP protocol, how an LDAP domain is structured, and we will look at Active Directory to cover what we need to know in order to use LDAP with AuthPoint. In the second video, we'll look at how AuthPoint integrates with LDAP and Active Directory, and we will cover how to troubleshoot the integration if it isn't working. Let's get started. LDAP is essentially a database that stores user objects. These objects can be computers, users, groups, or anything else that you may need to track. Each object has attributes that tell you about it, such as a user's name, phone number, email address, what groups that they are a member of, and so on. LDAP is an open source protocol, and there are many implementations of it, but the most common is Microsoft's Active Directory. It is important to remember that LDAP traffic is not encrypted by default and can contain very sensitive information, including passwords in plain text. Regular LDAP uses TCP port 389 for communication. We always recommend using LDAP-S, which encrypts the packets in transit and uses TCP port 636. With Active Directory, you only need to have a certificate authority deployed into your domain in order to use LDAP-S. An LDAP database structure is like a file system, and there are a few terms that you'll need to understand. Each object has a common name, which is like the name of a file. Objects can be contained inside of either organizational units or containers, both of which are like folders. To make it more confusing, CN can mean either common name or container. Just remember the first CN will be the common name, and any CNs after that are a container holding that object. At the root of the domain are the domain components, which are like a drive letter. Together, these form the distinguished name for any object. This is like its file path. Here is an example of a distinguished name for a user. You can follow the distinguished name to see each level of the domain separated by the commas. The user's common name is Brian, and he is in the trainer's organizational unit, which is under the root of the wgtrain.com domain. You can see how the domain name is written here, dc equals wgtrain, dc equals com. This forms what is known as the search base for our domain. We can query an LDAP database to locate objects within it. For example, we might use a query to locate the users that are a member of a specific security group in LDAP. We can do this by specifying member of equals and then entering the full distinguished name of the security group, like in the example here. Let's jump over to my server running Active Directory so we can see what this looks like. When we integrate this LDAP environment into AuthPoint in the next video, there are a few things we will need. We will need to know the domain name and LDAP search base for our domain. We will need a service account for AuthPoint to use, and we will need to know the IP address or domain name of at least one domain controller in the network. Here is the Active Directory users and computers snap-in, and on the left we can see the directory structure. Let's take a closer look. In this case, it's mostly just the defaults, and at the top we can see the domain name wgtrain.com. So now we know both the domain name, and we can write out our search base as dc equals wgtrain, dc equals com. Below the domain name are all of these folders, and you can see two different folder icons. One icon is blank, and those are our containers. The other icon has a smaller square inside. These are the organizational units. Either one of these can contain users, computers, groups, and other objects. When we integrate with AuthPoint, we will need to provide an account in LDAP for AuthPoint to use. Here in this custom System Accounts OU, I've already created a new service account for this purpose. We recommend creating a unique account in LDAP for AuthPoint to use, and do not use a user's account to ensure AuthPoint does not lose access to the domain in the future. The AuthPoint system account only needs domain user permissions, so I did not need to add this account to any additional groups. Since my AuthPoint account is not in the default users container, we will need to be able to find the distinguished name for this account. We can do this using a third-party LDAP browser, or I can do it right here in Users and Computers. First, I'll verify Advanced Features is selected under View, then I'll open the properties for my AuthPoint system account and view the Attribute Editor tab. I can find the distinguished name attribute here in this list. This works for any object in Active Directory. You may also need to run queries against the LDAP domain for testing and validation. Once again, you can do this using a third-party LDAP browser or right here in Users and Computers. If I right-click on the domain name, I can select Find, then I need to change the search type to Custom Search and go to the Advanced tab. Once there, I can enter an LDAP query to find users. Here I've simply searched for the common name of my AuthPoint account, but you can create complex queries to find groups of users as needed. That will do it for our first video on LDAP. We covered some basic information about the LDAP protocol and domain structure. We showed Active Directory and how the users and computers are laid out, then demonstrated how to find the distinguished name of a user or group, and how to run LDAP queries against the domain.